Tyrone Bowman live. Welcome to the program tonight. Welcome to the conversation. There are many historical truths about Black Americans that must be told. And they're going to be told because I'm going to tell their stories. Whether individuals try to erase us from history or not, it doesn't matter. Whether they decide to defund or try to eliminate Black History Month, it does not matter. Because we will tell our own stories. We will tell our own history. No one will eliminate or eradicate the Black experience and suffrage that took place here in America. So tonight, welcome to the program. I want to talk about one of Philadelphia's most memorable men, gone but never forgotten. Why? Because he will forever be remembered for the iconic figure that he was. None other than Georgie Woods, the guy with the goods. So those in Philadelphia who will be watching this video either live or later on, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm going to read an excerpt tonight from the book entitled Georgie Woods, I'm Only a Man, as written by James G. Spady. So this is the book I'm going to be reading from. Matter of fact, get a copy or go to your public library and ask them to bring you a copy. I found a picture of Georgie Woods. So who was Georgie Woods? He was a pioneering Black DJ or disc jockey. He was a pioneering commentator, a pioneering promoter. He was a mass communication specialist. He was a civil rights activist. If it hadn't been for this brother right here and others like him, that's him when he was in his prime. Let me see if I can get that there. Yeah, I got it. That's Georgie Woods, the guy with the goods, in studio when he was in his prime. I think he was working for either WDAS or WHAT here. This is an archive from Temple University from the Urban Archives. So check it out. And what I'm going to be reading about, I want to talk about chapter 4, no, chapter 5. Chapter 5 from Origins, it's chapter 4 and 5 combined. It's an excerpt. It's talking about the Orange in Destinies. Now, let me just get give you a brief background. So I'm picking it up where Georgie was telling the author about how his family migrated from the deep southern South in Georgia because of racism, Jim Crowism, the KKK, and all that stuff went on. When he came to Philadelphia with nothing. And this is the part that people want us to forget about. We're not going to forget about it. They don't want us to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. It's going to be up front and in your face. Whether they like it or not, it does not matter, because we get tired of the vitriol of racism, white supremacy, the Proud Boys, the white boys, the ignorant boys, whatever they want to call themselves. We're sick of it. We're tired of it. We're tired of hearing about all the garbage from the bigoted, racist MAGAites. Don't allow anyone to erase our history. Don't let anyone tell you that our suffrage doesn't count. Every other ethnic group that they talk about, their suffrage counts. The history is preserved. Their stories are always talked about. We're not getting over nothing. You don't tell them to get over it, so stop telling us what to do. In the city of Philadelphia, one of the hardest cities that people could ever live or work in, during that time, when he eventually landed in Philadelphia, during the late 40s, early 50s, it was a difficult time for a Black man to break into the radio business because they didn't have too many Black DJs at that time. So I'm going to pick it up from the author, and where Georgie Woods talks about the migration. Now, I'm going to warn you before I start reading. This language at some point in time is going to be detailed and explicit, but that's the way it was. And George did not relent. He didn't play. He didn't hold back. Quote, and we sang our memory, obeying an incarnate instinct. What else did Georgie Woods' mother have but an incarnate instinct? Trusting in the Lord, believing always that she could, with God's help, make a way out of no way. That is the history of black people in the land. And yet their souls are anchored, no matter how dusty the train ride, how bleak the future appeared. Georgie's mother knew she would have to take that journey. She had to do it all alone. Just her children. George rightly said, quote, brought us all here, got us all out of there, end quote. In order to understand the full implications of Georgie's tear statements, you will have to travel back in time to another place, another sense of being in the world. It was the 1930s Georgia, a tough state for black people. Oppression was an everyday occurrence, a sprawling destiny for so many of those who stayed there. A decade before Georgie Woods was born, another black man left the state of Georgia just as the Woods family went to New York. The other Georgian, Thomas W. Harvey, went to Philadelphia. He is the generation of Woods' parents, therefore vested with a special memory. Oh, brother. In the South particularly, in the rural sections, all Negro men worked under a contract. Many a man never knew what it was in the contract because they couldn't read it. He signed it by making a cross or mark. In other words, they did sharecropping. That's what they did. You know, Mark Twain and all these people used the N-word in all their writings because I read their books of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck, but you get mad when we tell the truth. Suck it up. Now let's get back into it. In the South, particularly in the rural sections, all Negro men worked under contract. Many a man never knew what was in the contract because they couldn't read it. He signed it by making a cross mark. He could break it, but the white man couldn't break it. If he kicked all your teeth out and you walked away, you broke the contract. No matter what he did to you, you had to stay there because of the contract. Now, I can remember when you were around May, June, July, and especially those big white farmers. If they needed labor, there was nowhere to get it from because all the Negroes were under contracts. See? What he used to do, he'd go to the prison and buy them out so they could be his laborers. Those days when you walk into a little town and you there the first 2 or 3 days or so, they wouldn't bother you. But you stayed around there a week and you're locked up for vagrancy. If some of those white farmers didn't pay you out, you went to prison, and in many cases, it was hard for the Negro to pay the white man back. You always owed a little bit more because they cheated them, that's why. You stayed a little longer, you know, you always owed a little bit more. I've known many Negroes just walk away. When I first came to Philadelphia in 1918, I met a fellow on South Street that I knew at home. And the time I saw him, I knew who he was. I was so glad to see him. I walked up to him and said, hello. His name was Pinckney. He looked at me and said, I'm afraid you got the wrong fellow. So I apologized and I looked at him. I said, you sure can pass for his twin brother. And I walked away. He called me, said, hey, wait a minute. Laughter included. He knew, I knew him. He started to ask me about his mother. Women like Georgie's mother had to encounter a lot to keep their families together. And that's where we get strong black women from. Something white society hates and despises. They call them the angry black women. What about angry white women? Always angry over something. Our strong black women come out of oppression, Our strong black women come out of depression. They come out of a great suffrage. So let's get back to the book. So women like Georgie's mother had to encounter a lot to keep their families together. The system of neo-slave rocracy, farm Tennessee, and oppression circumscribe the life, chances, and options of black men. The disintegration of the black family has its roots in the white oligarchy and peonage of the South. It is amazing to see black families as intact as they are given the multifaceted system of oppression they experience. To more fully comprehend, women like Mrs. Woods had to go through. We return to Thomas W. Harvey, who became Marcus Garvey's successor as President General of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA. Memories. I remember too that those crackers in the South were so determined in getting black women. It was so bad in this particular town that I've known occasions where if they met a Negro man or woman on the street, they would run him away and they would take the woman and use her. Oh, that's a stipulated fact. They'd rape her. One particular place called Wallacoochee. It's between Douglas and Valdosta on the Georgia and Florida Railroad, the Seaboard and Southern. It's a junction there. Wallacoochee was a hard place if the Negro man was traveling with a woman companion, especially if she was kind of attractive, you know. If he had to stop and change trains there, especially at night, he'd never make it through. If he survived the next day, he'd be in Lake Kaha River swamp. They'd grab that woman and use her all night. Wallacoochee was good for that, raping black women all night long. Everybody who would travel up and down that line knew about Wallacoochee and the things they would do in Wallacoochee, yeah. And the Negro neighborhood there crawled around black snakes at night, you know. They'd catch a woman and force her. Yeah, of course, they'd rape her. You know, have their way with her. I recall my mother was very sick, particularly bedridden. I had to go to the center of town at a drugstore to get a certain kind of medicine for her on my way back. This is Georgie Woods talking to the author. This undertaker shop was right on the corner. I had to go right by it, and at the very back of it there stood kind of a vacant lot like. When I got to the end of the building, this white cracker stepped out in front and said to me, "Hey, nigger, where you going?" I told him I was going home. "What you got?" I said. "I only have medicine for my mother." He said, "Look, nigger, you go on home and you give your mammy that medicine. And you come back and find me a nigger gal. If you don't ever let me see you again." I kept on walking. I went home and I didn't come back. I just went on about my business. I mentioned this to show you how bad things was in the South where a Negro was concerned. You could be sitting down in your home and all of a sudden the door fly open and the town marshals or the police would walk in and start looking in things and patting the women on the backside. You know, just as though you wasn't there. When they got good and ready, they'd walk out. Usually they'd come and see what you're doing, what you're saying, or what's going on inside. So there was no regard whatsoever for Negro privacy. His rights as a human being, a citizen, that was the last word, citizen. It seemed to me in my mind, if you was a citizen, you were entitled to some kind of protection and so on, just like everybody else. That wasn't the case in the South. Not for the Negro, no. There was any number of white people who were notorious for killing Negroes. Some of them carried a gun and kept notches cut in the handle of the gun to keep count of the Negroes they killed. You tell some, they think it's a lie, but that's the truth. A white man arrested and tried for killing a Negro? Oh no. Only one case I remember. Professor Ellis, who ran the school, or the Negro school in Douglas, he arranged for a fair in the fairground and ordered all these shows and everything. Of course, the white people came too. Everybody went into, like country-like, carnival-like things. There was a cracker who lived in that town. He was a notorious rascal, but he never had any trouble with Negroes, but he used to beat up white folks. When he'd get on one of those drunks, I think what kept him up, he was a professional painter. All of this fine painting and interior decorating, that was his type of work. So one night he got on a spree and he was rolling up cracker lips uptown and beating them up. So they said that he stopped suddenly and he said, God, I believe I'll go out to the fairgrounds, and the first Negro he met, he drowned him with a 45. Was standing over him with a gun in his hand. I was as close to him as from here across the street. We have provided lengthy testimony from one black man who lived to tell the story. There are many who did not. Some stood up to protect their wives and daughters. Their remains are still floating in some river. That is the background to the history of Georgie Woods. It also helps to illuminate the circumstances that gave rise to his mother's flight. Nearly 60 years later, Georgie and his brother look upon their mother's ability to rescue them from the ravages of Southern oppression as a victory. They eventually ended up in Harlem, New York, and then eventually came to Philadelphia. So what is the moral of this reading? Well, in the midst of trying to cancel what they call our critical race theory, they don't want to talk about black suffrage. They don't want to know anything about what black people went through in this country and in this nation after this contentious, bitter presidential election that took place. They think that black people have feeble memories. Black folk, you better listen, you better wake up. Get ready for the midterm elections. Come out in mass. Vote like you've never voted before and change the trajectory of it all. Remember this brother, Georgie Woods, the guy with the goods. He paved the way for you. He paved it for me. And that's why I read this excerpt from his book on tonight. When I graduated from a place called the American Academy of Broadcasting, Georgie Woods was the first person to give me a job. Didn't pay a lot of money, but didn't matter. I was working in radio. Never forget those who laid the foundation for you. Never forget those who blazed the trail and the path for you to walk on. Never forget those who fought bravely for you and for me. Never surrender, never quit.